You're listening to Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Overdoing It, where our team of library workers dish about their latest reads, views, and passions, alongside fascinating conversations with local luminaries. I'm your host, Lauren Walker, Director of the Coventry Public Library, and my pronouns are she, her. Let's dive in and discover who our guest is today. Today, I'm joined by Cynthia Bemis-Abrams, a conversational public speaker and lifelong TV fan who transitioned all the skills she gleaned in her public relations career to start a podcast in 2015 called Advanced TV Herstory. Advanced TV Herstory connects the dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics. To reach audiences beyond her listeners, she has co-authored a Law Review Journal article, Power Plays, Women and Progressive TV Battle Quid Pro Quo Sexual Harassment in the 20th Century, and a chapter in a yet-to-be-published book about the work of showrunner Susan Harris, best known for Soap, Benson, The Golden Girls, and Empty Nest. Hi, Cynthia. Welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here in Rhode Island-ish.
A little bit later in the show, I'll talk to Cynthia about the Advanced TV Herstory podcast. But before we get to that, let's start out, as we always do, with what have you been reading and watching?
Oh gosh, I just finished up season 2 of The Diplomat, which is a Netflix streamer
Okay.
starring Kerry Russell. Very good. If you liked Madam Secretary with Tia Leone, you would really like this. Very good, gripping. Only 6 episodes though, so right now you could binge the whole thing, which it's complicated. It's a complicated sort of very twisted thriller. And for the podcast, I've been watching documentaries. I watched Love Gilda. I watched Julia, which is a 2021 documentary about the life of Julia Child. And I need to watch another one tonight because I have an interview tomorrow. And it's with a documentarian. Reading, again, very, very busy time for me reading wise. Monday, I have an interview with the author of Eleanor Roosevelt on Screen, the First Lady's Appearances in Film and Television, 1932 to 1962. Fascinating. I don't know how this woman got all this information, but it's very cool. Also, I'm in the middle of Connie Chung's memoir, which just came out in October. Love, love, love. And that was one of those where the waiting list at the library was forever. And I wanted to read it now. And I'm glad because it is, I'm a connoisseur of memoirs. And because I'm looking for what is it that they have finally revealed that they've waited all this time to share. And she does. She shares and she's very it just feels like she's talking to you, and I love those kind. But she's also talking about the racism and the sexism of being in television news from the 70s and what she had to endure and what some of her finer moments are. So I'm loving that. And then just also finished up a fiction, and I'm not a big fiction reader, The Younger Girl, written by Georgia Jeffries. And again, this is an interview for later in the month. And Georgia Jeffries is an Emmy award winning TV writer, most known for Cagney and Lacey, China Beach, and Sisters. That's it. So just every free moment, I'm kind of on task right now.
Yeah, I'm amazed that you have any free moments. That's a lot of reading. Do you read physical books mostly, or audiobooks, or a little bit of both?
While as a podcaster, one might assume that I'm an oral learner, I am in fact a very visual learner. And in many cases, I mean, I will buy a book not knowing for sure if it's going to be a good one because I want to support both the local bookstore and the author. If it's in a super pinch and there's an e-version through the library, I will check it out that way. And if it is a super, super pinch, I will then buy the ebook through whoever sells it, Barnes and Noble and that other big company.
I I wanted to ask if you had read, I'm sure that you have read this book, and now I'm struggling to remember the name of it. But I think it's called When Women Invented Television.
Oh, yes.
Have you read that?
Jennifer Cation Armstrong's.
Yes.
Yeah. No, it's kind of on the list, and I have interviewed Jennifer twice for the podcast for the Mary Lou, Ted, and Rhoda book that she wrote now probably 10 years ago, and Sex and the City and Us. So yeah, it's kind of on my list. I'm down some really crazy rabbit holes right now of sort of thematic work, and right now I'm sort of swimming in documentarians, but I love that. So that's where I am. It's on the list.
Yeah, it's a really good one. And it's the first kind of introduction I had to how instrumental in TV Betty White was. I
Yeah.
didn't realize, I just knew her from Golden Girls. So,
And there's another one that was done earlier about the pioneering women in television, and I'm looking on my bookshelf right now, and I should be talking into my. Anyway, I could talk all day about the really good ones because I love a good memoir, and I will recommend it to anybody. So,
yeah. I'm also right now, I am reading Not Your China Doll, which is about Anna May Wong.
ooh,
It is by Katie G. Salisbury, and yeah, it's a biography of Anna May Wong, and it's pretty interesting her whole career and starting out in the 20s, and she was very adamant even back then about how she felt being born in America to Chinese immigrant parents that she was neither Chinese or American and had a hard time fitting in as either one of those. And reporters were always marveling that she didn't have a thick Chinese accent. And she was like, I was born in Los Angeles. And so I feel like that's really. We don't get a lot of snippets like that from the 20s and that far
right.
back. So I think that's really interesting that she just thought, I'm neither Chinese nor American. And these kind of identity things that a lot of people grapple with today, she was very vocal about in a time when people were not very open minded about race or anything like that.
And the control of the film studios was so much tighter,
Hmm.
and they could pull any story back. They had ways.
Yeah. And I'm trying to think of what I've been watching. Well, I've been watching Murder She Wrote because I
Ooh,
was sick about a month or so ago, and a friend of mine, a couple of friends of mine actually, had said that it's their comfort show that they like
no.
to watch. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was like, I've
Mm-hmm.
never seen it. So I started watching it when I was sick, ended up binging it for a week, and now I've just been watching it casually. It's a fun show.
Yes, I did a podcast episode. This was right after Angela Lansbury passed,
Mm.
and there is a podcast called whatever the name of the paper is in Cabot Cove, the Cabot Cove Express or something like that, and the woman who runs it is also a professor. So, and she's writing a book on Angela Lansbury's life, and so it was a kind of a two for three for kind of thing. But my kids, who are now in their 30s, would go to my mom's house after school because I was working. And back in my mom's little bedroom was the little couch and the little pillows and Murder She Wrote, and usually followed then by MacGyver. So they are well versed in sort of that comfort and that repetitive. Uh, Angela Lansbury was really onto something when they did that.
Yeah, it's great. There have definitely been a couple episodes where I didn't see it coming who ended up being the killer. But in general, I think there's something comforting to the formula of like I can tell by the way a character is introduced that they're gonna end up being the
Yep.
killer.
Yep. Yeah,
Yeah.
Angela Lansbury, very very cool, and what a prolific career that spanned what 60 years. So,
Yeah, she was amazing. I first saw her in the video of the stage production of Sweeney Todd when I was in high
mhm,
school. So
mhm,
that was my introduction to Angela Lansbury.
mhm. And then also she's in The Harvey Girls, which was an MGM musical, one of the ones that basically, contributed to Judy Garland being workhorsed for 4 straight years. The Harvey Girls, I believe, was 1944, and Angela Lansbury actually has a significant part. And most people just
Oh,
kind of
wow.
roll back to, oh, the Manchurian Candidate, and that's where she was a little out of character because she was a villain. But yeah,
Hmm.
it goes back to the Harvey Girls.
Interesting. I'll have to check that one out.
I found the musical overall kind of difficult to watch, and I don't even think I finished it. But it
Oh,
was
wow.
Judy being Judy, and I love to talk about Judy Garland as a feminist. There are so many women from those decades, the 40s, well, the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, who were working hard before Betty Friedan and Bella Abzug and Gloria Steinem started putting definitions on things. But wow,
Hmm.
the stories that they could or should have told.
Well, to segue into the
Hmm.
questions, you are one of the many podcasters I've met through Chris Revel of the Hey Roadie podcast. So I just wanted to give a little shout out to Chris. I believe, were you on his podcast, Let's Chat with Chris Revel? Is that how you know
Yes,
him?
I've been on, I think,
Okay.
2 episodes, and he has contributed some clips, kind of 5-minute clips to mine.
So he actually posted something from your Instagram on his story, and that's how I heard about your podcast. And I was so happy to hear that there was a podcast, B, it was about TV, and C, also
Hmm.
feminism. It was like all of my favorite things rolled into one.
Right.
So, but for listeners who may not be familiar with the Advanced TV Herstory podcast, can you tell us what the podcast is about?
Yes, and 7 years ago, I couldn't. It took me quite a while to sort of figure out where I fit in. And so early on, back in 2015, when podcasting was not, it was not young, but it had only been around for a couple of years. It was to just sort of tell the stories and to do greater biographical research to bring that forward for people in the audio format, and that was fun. I did some interviews. I was learning the technology along the way, and technology changed so much right up to COVID and then through COVID that it just is night and day compared to what it was. Today, we are connecting the dots of TV and feminism to American culture and politics. And what that kind of requires then is a knowledge of culture and politics and history and herstory, and then the understanding of where TV fits in, sometimes mirroring what is going on in America, and sometimes actually pushing, advocating.
And what brought you to start the podcast in 2015?
I had I had time on my hands because my kids were pretty much out of college at that point, and our parents had passed on, and we were just at a point where when all of a sudden you don't have that responsibility and you have time and you say, what do I want to do? I didn't have hobbies. Are you kidding? I worked in and was in elected office and had 2 kids and people to take care of. I had no hobbies. So I found a picture of what was my office in my parents' basement and the stack of movie magazines next to this little desk that had been somebody's, I don't know whose. And I looked at those and I just thought, that really was my life when I was 9, 10, 11, 12 years old, 14. And had I not grown up in Minnesota, I would have been a publicist, or a something. It was that fascinating. It took me an entire life of sort of telling stories and framing history and framing messaging for different audiences to get me to a point where I recognized that there was so much history and storytelling regarding the women both in front of the camera and behind the camera that hadn't been done. And what was the fastest way to do it? And I could have written, I could have blogged, but blogging was some like 2002 or something. And we were at a stage in 2015 where nobody was reading nearly as much. And now here we are 2025, and if you aren't on video, you're not making the most of all of your stuff. And I agree
Mhm.
with that and I don't agree with it, but when I put out video content that aligns with my audio episode, they get watched. So I'm good with that.
And so, do you have a professional background in film and television, or is it a personal interest that led you to research the women that you talk about?
Well, the thing about podcasting is it kind of calls for the person who has good knowledge spread across a lot of different skill sets. So my career had been in sort of PR, public relations, and marketing. So I understood how video editing works. I can't really do video editing. I understood how audio editing works, and I edited the first 2 years of all of my episodes. I cringed to think of just how bad it all sounded, but I did it, and that was sort of the point of pride. Was I'm learning this myself. I knew it was going to be a hobby. So my background is not professionally in film or television. I just knew I knew a lot, and I knew I had a lot of perspective. Actually, I think it's the perspective I bring from outside of television that makes me a better analyst of it and makes me beholden to no one. If you are listening to my podcast and you hear ads, it's because of the interference of whoever the distribution channel is. It's not because I am making money on it. I kind of feel like some of the questions that I ask and some of the areas we get into get to be what some people would consider controversial. Some people, other people are like, she doesn't push hard enough. But I have to find the middle point that makes me respect whoever it is that I'm speaking with, that we're talking about something that they feel confident that in the end what we're speaking is the truth. And I've never really said that out loud, but you need to make somebody feel comfortable on the other end that they can say whatever they need to say. And it's not like I've ever had to stop an interview or delete or whatever. Everybody has been very gracious with their time and their knowledge. So yeah, that philosophy or those principles wouldn't necessarily come from the industry, because the industry is more about getting your next gig.
Yeah. And you might go into it with preconceptions about what you're talking about if you were working in the industry, and you might assume that anyone listening has this knowledge that you and your guest have that they don't actually have. So I think you're right. I think coming from an outsider's perspective is helpful in that way.
Thank you.
What have been some of your favorite, or who have been some of your favorite actors or shows to cover on the podcast?
Wow. Another podcaster, Ashley Pacini, and I interviewed Margaret Cho, and we talked about racism on her show All American Girl, and I thought that that was really important. We talked about with Kim Fields of The Facts of Life. I'm just talking about some of the big names right now, because at any time you're then speaking with somebody who people really recognize, you both have a responsibility to be super respectful, but then also they'll say some things, and that's cool. And these are women who want to talk about more serious things. So Kim Fields talking about representation and being one of the few young Black women on TV in the 70s was really important. And then talking about how, as an adult, she needed to reinvent herself. And there were just, some really dark days. And so she was very candid. And yes, she had just written a book, but she didn't have to be that candid. We did a 5-part Judy Garland series on the Judy Garland show, which was 26 episodes from 1963 to 1964. And I learned a lot about Judy Garland. I also read probably close to 1,400 pages of some of the major books that have been written about her life and that show, that particular TV series. And that was an interview with a woman in Chicago who is kind of a Judy Garland scholar slash interpreter of sorts. And she sings very well. And so she performs and tells these stories. And that was just a lot of, oh my gosh. Yeah. Mostly, I would say, interviews, because you're talking with somebody who is as passionate about a subject as I am. However, a very, very early one, two early ones. One, Diana Ross's 1983 concert in Central Park, which is, you can say it's on TV because it was back when Showtime, which was one of the first two, premium cable channels you could buy off of your cable package. Showtime was sort of trying to build itself by underwriting or creating these concerts in Central Park. And so Barbara Streisand and Simon and Garfunkel, Diana Ross. And in 1983, they videoed it. So the video is available. Diana Ross seems to own it. And it's very sporadically available on DVD, but it is Diana Ross in concert in pouring rain, pouring rain, with something that some people say is 600,000 people on the Great Lawn of Central Park in New York. And so I bought the DVD because I had only remembered hearing about it. I was in college at the time, and I just watched it, and my jaw just dropped. And so I kind of crafted it around the kind of leadership skills that Diana Ross deployed in this, what is now a 45-minute, highlights DVD. But anyway, the DVD is almost unfindable, and you can sort of rent it, I think, on Amazon for like $20 or something. I really encourage you to, because it is a reminder that Diana Ross is just an unsung talent in so many ways. The other episode from that first year was when I did a profile of the mothers and daughters of that very short-lived series, My So-Called Life. And My So-Called Life has a bit of a cult following. I mean, it touched a portion of a generation in just a profound way. And the showrunners, Herskowitz and Zwick, and Winnie Holtzman, who did most of the writing for it, just incredibly talented people. And it ended sort of unexpectedly. It was supposed to just finish out the season, and Claire Danes, who was one of the stars, maintained that they were told that it was just the ratings. But then they didn't even get their last episode. And I believe that the last episode had more to do with the fact that this storyline for a young gay man character was sort of leading. It was pretty provocative for 1995. And I mulled around the question, and I have no authority. I do not have it on authority that was the reason why it did not get to air its last episode. But why else would you have basically told people, well, we're going to run out the clock, and then you just stop the clock? And I thought it had to do with that.
Did they film the episode and
Mm-mm.
never air it, or it was never
They just
filmed?
got shut down.
Wow.
And so I
Hmm.
really, I just thought about it for like a week. I'm like, why? And I went back and I watched the last 3 episodes again, because that is available on DVD. And this was before stuff was readily available on streaming. I think My So-Called Life is out there somewhere.
I think it is. I think I've watched it on streaming before.
Yeah,
I always forget that that show only had, was it one season or two seasons?
I think it was one.
Might have just been one. Yeah. It has such a following that, and it's so well known that I always think of it as being a longer running show.
Yeah. And some of those, you almost think these people knew that they were living on borrowed time, and that, what they were doing was so fresh and so unusual that it wasn't necessarily sustainable.
Hmm.
It was never going to be super popular.
Yeah.
Same with Judy Garland's show.
I would love to have a business card as interesting as Judy Garland Scholar.
Well, if you're ever in the Chicago area, go to see Angela Ingersoll do her Judy show, because she really, the Judy Garland following is amazing. But that literally is a life that from the age of 11 or so was documented every single day of her
Hmm.
life.
So, is there a particular actor, or do you say actor for everyone, or do you say actress? Do you have a preference there?
Well, I'm sure my first 8 seasons or whatever, I said actress, because that was, I mean, whew, there's been a lot of change in 10 years. I now say actor. Yeah, usually. Sometimes I'm sure I'll slip.
Sure. I mean,
Uh,
I was reading a quote this morning, which is what made me think of it, from Renee Zellweger, where someone asked her if she prefers actress or actor, and she said she became an actress, but now she's an actor, and but she was kind of jokingly saying it like she doesn't really have a preference. And I know that some people don't care if they're called an actress or an actor. I try to say actor because I think of like doctor. It's a very similar word. And I think
mhm.
if someone called a woman doctor a doctress, I would not be okay with
Right, right.
that.
Yeah.
um,
So is there someone who I'm, want to do?
yeah,
Is that what?
that was my question is there an actor or a particular show that you're looking to feature on the podcast in the future?
Well, right now I seem to be mired for good reason in 20th century, in the old stuff. And the more work I'm doing on a project of mine, the more I'm just seeing lots of people who are still alive, who participated in TV herstory, and seem to be accessible And so some of them are behind the scenes people because honestly, their memories of things are very different than the people who perhaps were in front of the camera. The one very cool one, and I just don't think it's ever going to happen, but she is still alive, is Lee Grant. And Lee Grant's incredible memoir. I absolutely encourage it, and it's probably in all of your libraries because it was that good. And she was blacklisted due to her marriage, actually. She herself was not really connected to communism, it was who she was married to at the time. And so I did a great interview with a professor, just incredible scholarly woman who is an American, but she's living in Australia. And she's able to write a couple of books about how cable TV's expansion and sort of the whole business behind multimedia and conglomerates and everything, how that changed TV for women in particular. And so that got me down a little bit of a rabbit hole about the Lifetime network, which has been around almost since day one of cable. And it made total sense. I mean, that's just where they farmed the women out to, all the women's shows. One of those women's shows was called Intimate Portraits. And so that is really the TV version of just producing an incredible number of episodes that are biographies of famous women who had never had the chance to be biographed in print. And this was a way to sort of, at least for a moment, celebrate their careers. Lee Grant directed something like 45 or more of the 245 episodes across an 11-year, 12-year period of time. If you are interested in women's TV herstory, that Intimate Portrait series is, it's critical because they were covering women celebrities, and politicians and political leaders from other countries, and religious leaders and spiritual, all of it. I mean, it's an incredible series and hardly any of them are available.
I was just going to ask that.
I think the one on Princess Diana is and Grace Kelly, how those, it was determined those should be put onto DVD. It was a time of VHS. So I don't know, could they have put a season onto VHS? Well, maybe they did. And in it, but you can't find a VHS on eBay even. So Lee Grant is something like 95 years old or something like that. And her daughter is in the business too. And every once in a while you see something pop up and I think, should I try one more time? And I feel like I should now because I've talked about it twice today. So that must mean that it's kind of sitting right up there.
It never hurts to ask.
Oh, no. I think the little bit I've seen of her video of her in the last few years, she still is pretty sharp. So I think she'd be a good interview, even if it had to be short. It would be kind of cool. The other part about doing all of these episodes, as you well know, as an interviewer, is to differentiate yourself from every other person who's ever interviewed them, so you can't ask the questions that they've answered because this is the internet. People can find that somewhere else. They're gonna find that somewhere else. I have to ask them something that I'm pretty sure nobody else has asked them, and that's a challenge. And in the end, it makes for really good audio if you can get it.
That is true. So if you were to pick one episode to recommend to first-time listeners, which one would you recommend to be the first one to listen to?
Oh boy. I will say that the Diana Ross episode, a lot of people have just said it sort of oozes enthusiasm. And what I had to do was recognize that for the most part, people were never going to be able to see this. I do pull clips. And so technically I operate the legal end of the podcast under the umbrella of fair use. So because I'm not earning money from anything that I'm doing, and I am making very judicious use of the audio clips, I am not in any way trying to replay anything within the podcast. And then I try really hard to create the credit, both within the podcast audio episode of, you can find that at, wherever, or you can't find it. It's only available on DVD. So I don't in any way take credit for the creation of that audio. So the Diana Ross episode from early, like 2015. And then I had a lot of fun just last year in June. So in the 1970s, there was the TV series Policewoman, and in 1974, Angie Dickinson would be another one. And Angie Dickinson is going to take all of her. What an incredible life! She's going to take all of her secrets to the grave. She's never gonna. She has too much knowledge of things. Anyway, so it's an episode of Policewoman, and at the same time, in the same couple of years, an actor named June Lockhart, who also goes all the way back to a Judy Garland movie. June Lockhart is a guest on a talk show and basically kind of stands up to a bully on an LGBTQ issue.
Oh,
So it was a bit of a rabbit hole that I got down with regard to an author who had done a book, and then this video that popped up on YouTube. And I thought it was fascinating that somebody actually had a video of TV from 1970 on YouTube, and that in and of itself is a story. And then I was just digging around, and in the end, there's no better way to understand social change than to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who was there when they include. So the episode of Policewoman, Pepper, is kind of an ally to a woman who's a lesbian. And of course, they're lesbian criminals, which is evidently a thing, kind of unseemly and not trustworthy women. So there was a bit of a trope going on there, but in the end, there is toward the very end this conversation that she has with this woman, and she says, being able to love somebody and all of that, and I'm like, oh my god! And when I'm watching TV and I get to oh my god, I know that there's an episode that's about to happen, and so that's what I really like, and it's a standalone, and it's just me talking. Both of those are just me talking because I also like all of the interviews, but it's not quite the same as me shining a spotlight on a moment in TV herstory.
great. Well, for our listeners, those are the episodes to check out first if you haven't listened.
Yeah, I think Pepper and June is the Pepper and June 70s LGBTQ allyship or something like that.
I'll definitely have to check that one out because I haven't heard that one either. So, as a feminist, how do you grapple with some of the not so feminist tropes, like you were just saying, and stereotypes that come up in television? For example, I listened to your episode about Cheers, which I actually just watched for the first time this year, and or last year, actually, in 2024. And so you have Carla and Diane, and they're both, on the one hand, pretty independent female characters, and Diane brings this sort of intellectual and compassionate voice to the show. But on the other hand, it's like this trope of women always being against each other and in opposition to each other. And sometimes it's hard to tell if Diane's lines are supposed to be taken as a joke, like she's the butt of the joke, or if the show is kind of
Hmm.
using her to be the voice of reason. And so I wondered how you interpret things like that and how that can affect your enjoyment of an older show or of any
Fortunately,
show.
there's so much TV on, I don't have to watch Cheers ever again. Unless, yeah, for people who were around and, in their teenage years or younger even, and remember Thursday night and Cheers, there was nothing wrong with it at the time. And I have obviously the benefit of age to remember that. And I can even look back on, the Leave It to Beaver and so I just intellectually peel it back to who it is that brought this forward. What were their intentions? And did those intentions age well? And I don't think Cheers has aged as well as people would like to think it has. I also think it's unpopular to say that out loud, but I said it because ultimately what I said was in the podcast in 1982 or 83 or 84, if you were a young woman in the suburbs or anywhere and you were going to high school hoping to go to community college or nursing school or something like that, the idea that nobody wanted to be a Carla or a Diane. We did not want to be butts of jokes. And we didn't want to be around men who could just belly up to the bar and then proceed to make really disrespectful remarks about their wife. Really? Is that what I have to look for? Is that what marriage is going to be all about? It was pleasant comedy for the time, and a lot of it was just good, straight up traditional, variations on the same jokes. But there were literally, it ran for so long. So they had like something like 400 people writing on it, and less than 10% of the writers were women.
I mean, that does not surprise me.
That says it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think watching older shows, I often have a hard time, like with the example of Cheers, it's hard to tell if Diane says something that makes perfect sense to me. Is that because my way of thinking is comical to the 1980s, or is it because someone like slipped that in as the voice of reason and the joke is that the people who disagree with it won't get it? It
Hmm.
is always hard for me to tell how much I like something. I think when I haven't, there are certain shows where there's nostalgia for it. I grew up watching Friends. A lot of people now take issue with Friends, but all I remember is the things that I liked about it. And so when I watch a show like Cheers that I'd never seen before, I don't have that nostalgia, and it's
Hmm.
a little confusing for me.
Shelley Long, for the most part, once she left the show, Shelley Long just lived by the premise that if you can't say anything nice, don't say it at all, and is very judicious in what she has said.
Hmm.
And I feel bad because it really ended up affecting her career. And as we all know, if you become difficult to work with, the opportunities just don't flow the way they should.
Right. Well, on the more positive side of things, do you have a favorite show or like a comfort show that you tend to watch over and over again?
I mean, I have a lot of physical media, which I don't probably spend as much time watching as I should, because I have it and I love it, and I will collect it if I'm somewhere and they have, somebody's getting rid of DVDs. Probably Bones, as weird as this sounds, it's reliable, and it's currently available on the BBC network on our Comcast cable. I have some DVD sets. It's refreshing, and it's always available. So if I had to, if I'm surfing and I'm not finding anything, well, first of all, it's always there, thankfully. And I guess the other one I would say that I do watch on DVD is Hot in Cleveland. Did you ever see that?
I definitely saw some episodes of it. I think when I was in college was the last time I had cable, and it was on
Yeah.
TV Land, wasn't it?
Yep, yep.
Yeah.
It was a TV Land production. I really encourage you to buy it on DVD because it is Betty White at her sauciest. And so the four women, if you are unfamiliar with it, Valerie Bertinelli, Jane Leeves from Frasier, Wendy Malick from lots of sitcoms, very funny, great timing, and then Betty White. And and so Valerie and Jane and Wendy are all, well, at the time, I don't know, I guess they would have been like in their late 40s, early 50s, and Betty White was then in her 80s. And just the generational dynamic plus the timing of these four very smart. I mean, it's physical comedy, it's facial expressions, but it's also the timing and the structure of the language. And it was very well written. So for 5 or 6 seasons, that is one of the very few laugh out loud. I mean, I can watch those episodes 6 times and I'm still laughing at the same lines because they are that good. And when I really just need a boost, I will go watch Hot in Cleveland bloopers because Betty White is so funny.
I'll definitely have to check that out because I would love to see Betty White bloopers.
If you can get your library system to get some copies of Hot in Cleveland, the DVD series, do so. You'll
We might have it. Now I want to be able to confirm on the air if people can borrow it. And you can borrow it. Looks like season 1 and 2. I'm not seeing other seasons.
Well, they are available and probably pretty inexpensive to acquire. So I encourage you. What a great show.
So we wrap up the show with a segment called The Last Chapter, where we talk
Mhm.
about a library or bookish related question. And today I wanted to ask, how do you feel about adaptations of books into TV series? And are there any that you've watched that you particularly liked or disliked?
Well, I am, as you know, not a huge fiction person. So I'm going to peel this back for a little lecture on made for TV movies, which were the thing. That was miniseries, and made for TV movies were the Netflix of the day. That was where the networks poured a bunch of money, and usually it was an adaptation of a famous work, with not like Dr. Zhivago, where it was a four-hour movie, but Winds of War comes to mind with major names, Ali McGraw and Robert Mitchum, and just incredible. And all those Eleanor Roosevelt and Franklin Roosevelts, and Backstairs at the White House. I found those to be fascinating, and they generally sent me to the book. I probably was one who watched it on TV first, and when I did Backstairs at the White House not that long ago, I did a podcast episode on it, which I just thought was really interesting, because it was based on a book that had been written in like 1963 by a woman of color, who had been a lifelong maid or house person at the White House, and her mother had been as well. So between the two of them, they had this incredible live, witness to history. And it was in that same year then that Jackie Kennedy arranged for there to be basically a confidentiality agreement that permanent White House staffers had to sign, so that
Wow.
they couldn't write another memoir. So it was kind of like the last time before the barn door closed. And what this woman did in her book, and I think they were pretty respectful of in the miniseries, was the real lives of real presidents and their families and their wives, and some of the reactions when they died, that knitted family that we don't really think about in the White House. But the relationships are very real. We only find out about really what it was like when, as in the case of President Carter, they pass away, and the people who are still alive who worked in that family's presence and served that family come forward with their heartfelt memories.
That sounds fascinating. What was the name of that again?
The book is called Backstairs at the White House. Yeah, it was good. I Sorry that I can't remember who the author is.
Oh no, that's okay. I just remembered what I have been watching, which is actually an adaptation of a book into a TV series. um,
Okay.
so it's called Station 11. I don't know if you've heard of it.
No.
It is fiction, and it's a book about basically there is a pandemic that in the matter of days wipes out most of the people on the planet, and the people who are left, it takes place 20 years after that, and tells some of their stories and how they're rebuilding. And someone is creating a museum of civilization that started with just someone's iPhone and grew from there, from people bringing
Wow.
things from the modern world. And it's really interesting. And I loved the book. And I started the TV series. And I have to say, the beginning of the TV series with the opening scene is different from the book. And so right off the bat, I was like, uh-oh, like, I don't know if I'm going to like this. But
Hmm.
I stuck with it for a couple of episodes, and now I'm hooked again, and I'm remembering things about the story. And I will say, for anyone listening who read the book, the TV series is different. And I haven't finished it yet, so I can't say if it like ends similarly, but
Hmm.
there are aspects of it that are very different. So it's almost like two pretty separate things.
Hmm.
But I generally think if you watch whatever it is first and then read the book, you're more likely to like both things. Whereas if you read the book and then watch the thing, it's not going to measure up because
Right.
books tend to have so much more information in
Yeah.
them.
And you've and
Yeah.
you've entered it all into your head that it's going to go this one way.
Yes.
For the record, if you can splice this back in, so Backstairs at the White House, as a miniseries, a four-part miniseries, played in 1979, and it starred, among others, Olivia Cole, Leslie Uggams, and Louis Gossett Jr. The 70s were definitely a time where those miniseries and those made-for-TV movies was a way for um, performers of color to actually get work, regular work, because otherwise they were consigned to very, very deep supporting roles within otherwise traditional white casts of most of the
Mhm.
TV series. And the book itself is actually called My 30 Years Backstairs at the White House by Lillian Rogers Parks.
Okay.
I liked both of them. The book was very readable. I mean, like, a 10th grader today easily could read it. It moved, and it was just written at that right level.
Great. And so before we wrap up, do you want to let our listeners know where they can find the Advanced TV Herstory podcast?
Yes. If you're not into podcast apps and you find them through URLs or websites or whatever, tvherstory.com is my website, and there is the full archive and the player right there, as well as descriptions about most of the episodes. We are found on most major podcast apps, including Pandora and Spotify, and on YouTube. And in cases where there's a video of the interview, then there is a video version, and then there's just the audio version with a static image. And one way or another, if comments are left or whatever, please subscribe wherever you can. The content varies. And I think that is, it sort of makes it more of a valuable thing to go back and grab 3 or 4 or 5 and just sort of listen when you're in the mood for feminism and feisty and TV, and maybe a little bit of a walk down memory lane of your favorite whatevers, or you're mad and you want inspiration from other women. So yes, and then on Instagram, I believe it's Advanced TV Herstory, and on Blue Sky Social, though, it's myself, and that is Cynthia Bemis-Abrams.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. My goodness. And, big supporter of libraries. When you think about all that they do for us through our tax dollars, and when it comes to the end of the year, and we kind of count what we're thankful for here in our household, that includes writing a check, not a fancy check, but a check of recognition to the Library Foundation, because they are doing so much other good work that we don't even know about, that doesn't touch us, but we know is helping the lives of others.
Well, thank you for that, and I'm sure your library greatly appreciates that support.
They're a pretty good group. So as all librarians are. So you are at the front, you're at the forefront, and you're doing great work, and we just don't thank our librarians enough. It takes a special, it's not you're part teacher, you're part troubleshooter, you're part deep diver, and that's pretty cool. What I will say is most librarians have incredible patience, and that, so like you're a nurse of information.
I
Anyway,
like that.
you really are making a difference, and it is noticed and appreciated.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening. Overdoing It is proud to be a resident partner of the Rhode Island Center for the Book, and brought to you by library staff and community members all around the Ocean State. The project has been funded in part by the Rhode Island Office of Library and Information Services. If you'd like to share your answer to our last chapter question, send us an email at overdoingitpod@gmail.com, or find us on Instagram at overdoingitpod. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify to help us reach more Rhode Islanders. Thank you again for listening, and this has been another episode of Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. We're overdoing it, but you're doing just fine.